Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. This is Dr. Keith McNally. This is the Envision Speakers Series. I'm here with Andi Buerger, and I'm here with a lady named BQ only because she has given me permission. BQ, what's your real name?
You want the whole name? The whole name is Maria de Guadalupe Blanquita Telvina Walsh Cullum Tona La Segunda. Other people call me Blanquita Cullum. That's my name, my legal name. And my good friends like you, Dr. Keith, you get to call me my nickname, which is BQ.
Which throughout the rest of this conversation is all I'm going to be able to do. So I do appreciate that. And so, as a disclaimer, before we get into any part of this conversation, my audience needs to know that we're going to go deep into something that may be squeamish or very difficult for people to appreciate or even listen to or watch. And so we're going to be talking about human slavery, specifically in regards to human trafficking. Now, I know in our planning call, you equated the two because they're basically stripping somebody of their human rights, their legal rights, their human rights. And so for this conversation, they will be used interchangeably. But for our listening and watching audience, please recognize that this is going to be the topic of our conversation. So if this is going to trouble you, turn it off. Otherwise, for those of you who are watching and listening, Andi, BQ, let's go ahead and get started. Before we do, however, I need the two of you, one at a time, please, to tell us who you are and what brings you to this conversation.
BQ, take it away.
Well, I'm a broadcaster and a journalist and have had kind of an interesting career for 40 plus years, including being Senate confirmed during the President George W. Bush administration, overseeing all of our international broadcasting from Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, going into Cuba, Marti. But my pleasure has been really doing talk radio throughout the years. And that's how I met Andi. I was doing my program called The Hard Question, and I had an intriguing guest that day who was going to be talking about a place called Beulah's Place. What I didn't know was when I met Andi that she was going to change my life. Now, I grew up in a pretty good family, normal family, like a lot of your watching viewership has grown up in. But Andi had a tough life and she'd been trafficked. She'll tell you more about that from a very early age. Well, she and I became friends, and throughout the time that we became friends, we decided to try to expand what she was doing. And together we formed something that Andi brilliantly labeled as Voices Against Trafficking. And it's been my great honor to be a friend of Andi, and to see all the people that we have been able to bring to the table from around the world to safe houses in Mexico, all over Europe, even in Africa and across the United States in a broad variety of ways. And we encourage everybody to check us out by going to voicesaginsttrafficking.com. And that way you can see who the people are. But you'll also find out how brave and courageous they are. People like you, Dr. Keith, who have a conscience for people that are suffering, people that have been close to really want to ending their life because the pain has been so unbearable. And then there are people like me who've stumbled along and had the good grace of God to be able to meet these survivors like Andi and decide to make a difference and join along and see if we can't save more people. So that's kind of my story. And I think I mentioned to you that I live by a code that my, at one point, 6-year-old granddaughter left on my table. And you know how kids are so sweet. She's one of the loves of my life. I have 4 grandchildren. And on there, she left me a little sweet message. She said, Mimi, which is my grandma name, hope is the best of all things. And I'm telling you that, and the journey that I am traveling with Andi has made us strong and continues because we feel that people who are in desperate situations need to find that light of hope.
BQ, that was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Andi, what brings you to the table today? This is your story.
Yeah, well, I am just really so thrilled that BQ could join us because she's not just president of Voices Against Trafficking, not just co-founder, but a great friend, and we call each other sister because that's how close the relationship has been and why we work so well together. I think because, like you, Dr. Keith, we have that compassion and that desire to not let anyone hurt if they don't have to, and those that have been hurt to give them the hope that they can find healing and have a future, just like God intended all of us. But to your point about background, for those who don't know my story, from the ages of 6 months to 17 years old, I was trafficked by all immediate family members and some extended family members before there ever was a term. I mean, we just came up with that term maybe 20 years ago. But in the early 60s, we didn't even talk about child abuse. I mean, nobody in that culture would have ever admitted it. And if it happened, it was swept under the rug, or you didn't go to that special uncle's house or wherever. Nobody talked about the truth of what was happening. And so by the age of 5, between the, physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the mental, emotional, the torture, all of that stuff, being locked up, all those things that a 5-year-old child should never have to experience. And every holiday was ruined with violence. I decided that I would just go out and take my own life because my birth mother had promised that she could do it any day she wanted and I would never know. So I did. I went out to the curb of my house and I thought I'll just wait for a car to be going by fast enough because it has to kill me. I can't be maimed. I can't be kind of hurt. I have to be dead in order to have peace. And so no car came by, amazingly. And while I'm waiting, I'm looking up into this huge sky and it's so blue and it's so big. And I was just mesmerized for that moment. I was so broken inside. And I wondered if somebody out there made it, and if they were bigger, than the people that were hurting me, because I really wanted to believe that. And in that moment, I literally heard this voice within my heart that said, "This is not the plan I have for you. Suicide is not the answer." And so I was startled, but I listened and I trusted when I had no reason to trust. And I went back up to the garage and stood against the door. And I just said, "If you keep me alive, I'll do whatever you call me to do." And those are the exact words, as clear as mud or clear as day, one of those two, today, after all these decades. And it was not easy. There was a lot of pain. I tried to take my life 2 more times at 8 and 9. I know I was probably severely depressed at age 16, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. Predators keep their prey, their victims separated, isolated, and then they alienate anyone who tries to get too close and could find out the secrets. We moved a few times, yes. My birth mother became a teacher, which made it worse because it made everything we did harder because she was more concerned about her image now, not just in church or in the house, but in a job. And so my birth father absolutely had no regard for what was going on. They both operated out of perversity or out of depravity, not for greed, because in those days, they didn't even know they could have made money off of what they were doing. So fast forward to age 17, that was the last time my birth mother tried to kill me by choking me to death. And the only decent thing my birth father did was pull her off of me in that moment. But again, where does a 17-year-old that has no family relations, no money, nowhere to go in the middle of the night, even though I did run out of the house, I realized I was stuck. I had to go back there if I was going to be able to eat or sleep even for another day or two. I didn't have a choice because if the police had picked me up, a minor 18 and under would still have been sent back to the parents.
That is a story that I never want to hear again, to be quite from you or from anybody else. And so it's on
Yeah.
record. That is such a horrible, horrible story. But out of that story, you found something. You found
Yeah.
something to hold on to. And that's going to be our journey today. You found a level of hope that you could hold on to. And even though you were heard that voice when you were 5 years old, something about you held on to it. What was it about you that held on to it?
Absolutely. I think I knew without experientially knowing. There's an intellectual knowledge, right, that we have, and then there's actually experiencing that knowledge. And for me, that was God. For other people, it might be something else, but I knew that God existed in that moment, and that He was bigger, even though I couldn't see Him, couldn't touch Him. And for me, yes, the miracle that I survived, yes, but for me, the greater miracle is that I trusted, that I had that fragile thread of hope, which became the title for my first book, that teeny tiny, it might be okay, it's possible, just that little thread that kept me moving forward. And then there would be other deposits of hope along my journey, whether it was a stranger who was kind to me or something that I saw that kind of fattened up that thread after a while. And when you hang on so long, it eventually becomes a rope. And with a rope, you can climb out, but you still need someone on the other end to help pull you up. And so that's what it became, was a life choice, because I had to make choices that I would never be like those people. I also made the choice at 19 that I wanted to help kids that were hurt like me so that they could have a future and a hope, and go on and do great things, because I really believed God intended that. And yet, in my 5-year-old mind, I also knew that because we have the gift of free will, it was not God who caused that situation. It was humans choosing to do evil, just like there are humans that choose to do good. And in the middle, we have people that choose to do nothing, which is really just as bad as doing the evil itself, in my opinion.
So with that, we're going to take a journey of hope today, because with the two of you, and I see it in your background, Voices Against Trafficking, that's kind of your bread and butter right now. That's kind of what you are. That's your mission, that's your vision, that's your goal, is to salvage those who are hurting, as I understand it, rescue those who are trapped, and then provide education and support for those who can make a difference. And so let's take a look at each of those elements in piece. And BQ, this is kind of where you come into the conversation, because Andi said you're the president and co-founder of everything that's going on here. So what motivated you to become a part of Andi's vision?
Well, I've had a long journey, so I know that the audience can be empowered. The audience, many people in the audience are looking to try to make the world, their communities, their families stronger and better. So, and I've worked throughout my career. I worked with Crime Stoppers when I was, just starting in television. I know how the audience got involved in that. I've done a lot of community work, working with veterans and so forth. So I've seen many volunteers. When I heard Andi's story, and when Andi said to me at one point, she told my audience, had she just had known as a young person that there were people out there that knew that she existed, that people like she were in trouble, that would have given her even more incentive and more hope. Well, my career's been in broadcasting. So I tried to make sure that when we first started, Andi's been on so many radio and television programs. She's been in print, her book, Fragile Thread of Hope. And then we did our first Voices Against Trafficking book, which is now, we're very thrilled about it, is in the Library of Congress. And we have had, when we first started, we were able to utilize some of the support from many members of Congress that I've gotten to know throughout my career. And they actually hosted us inside the Congress, and it was bipartisan. Well, they don't do anything pretty much bipartisan nowadays, except on the issue of human rights. And so good friends like former Congressman Pete Olson, and oh my goodness, we've had so many members of Congress from the left and the right that have joined hands with us to support us. And then we started reaching out across into the states. And Andi's talked to her governor and her mayor, and we've done that in Texas, and we've done it now. We've reached out, like I say, in Mexico, working with people that have been fighting human trafficking on the border. This is now become, for a lot of the cartels, human smuggling / trafficking is really more profitable for them in a way than even drugs. So we're now trying to work with a lot of the people who are our colleagues and allies in Mexico and around the world. And they've really, through the friends I have in the business, I served as the president of the National Association of Radio Talk Show Hosts for about 9 years. And a lot of my pals have said, absolutely. And they want to help Andi. And we've had great people who are on the air currently that have become charter members. And every time they get a chance, we have a wonderful guy whose name is Kelly Wright, America's Hope. It's on the Epoch Times NTD. He's one of our charter members. We've had the late Jim Bohannon, who took over for Larry King and was on more than, oh my goodness, I want to say 750 radio stations around the world. A lot of very talented people that have said, okay, what can we do? We have the airline ambassadors. We have people that are with Enough is Enough, our good friends that are trying to stop the pornography and the trafficking online. Donna Rice, great hero. We have now found people saying, well, look, we're already a 501c3. We said, well, don't lose your 501c3, your nonprofit status. But we've kind of collaborated with everyone because we have found, as Andi has so articulately said, many voices speaking together as one were more powerful. So that's kind of using my old broadcasting chops that started in rock and roll to try to be able to understand the community. There are a lot of people out there. They don't like what's going on because, the beautiful thing about this country at the heart of America, even in these times when people get canceled and they have become aligned with groups that are not so kind, the fundamental core of the United States, we don't like bullies. We don't like bullies. And we certainly don't like people and organizations that target the most innocent. So that's kind of how I got started working with Andi. And that's how our collaboration is growing with great people like you.
Well, let me add to this conversation by saying there are people out there who don't even know that this problem actually exists. And that seems like, really, how can that even possibly be? It's on like radio and TV and news. And let me give you a for instance. And so I live here locally in Virginia, Eastern Virginia, and most of my days are right here. And so this is where I work. This is where I play. It's a 10 by 10 little room. And I spend most of my, Monday through Friday and sometimes Saturday and Sunday here as well. So I don't get out much is what I'm saying, but every once in a while I do. So I have to go shopping for food and basic survival needs. And one time I was at at a strip mall, at a, grocery store, and I heard some people talking about this lady, and it wasn't even a young lady. It was like a 20-something-year-old, and she had gone missing. She literally had gone missing. And the idea, even the conversation of she was probably taken, came up. And I'm thinking, wow, that's the first time I've actually ever heard the conversation with my own ears in a real world situation. So even people, they don't have to be 5, they don't have to be teenagers.
Right.
Apparently, they could be adults.
Correct.
Even older adults. There doesn't seem to be any discrimination anymore about this being a reality that's part of our world. Am I right on the mark here? Because again, I live
You
in a
are.
very isolated situation.
Not that isolated, because honestly, and you'll see a lot of things online now, even when you go to a lot of videos, there are now groups like Dar Man videos where they try to help you see how to treat people more appropriately, how to be able to tell if somebody's in trouble, where young kids will give a signal with their hands to let you know that this is not their father or their mother. And Andi, I mean, you know this more because honestly, Andi is so amazing. She is so amazing. What has happened with her, Andi is one of those people, she'll know when they're in trouble. And when they won't talk to other people, when these children or these adults are so traumatized, they can sense that she's a survivor. Talk about that, Andi.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, Keith, that's exactly what happens. It'll come up in conversation, maybe. A lot of people that just aren't clued in, they hear the big news, but the news is not out there promoting that missing child, or there aren't any pictures on the walls of big box stores saying, have you seen this person? That 20 whatever year old woman, absolutely. College students, adults. Just a real quick example, and then I'll go back to that to the hope that we gave to kids that we rescued because of this situation and people not knowing or understanding is that there was a woman in a big box store doing her grocery shopping, and she noticed that there was a man who had an empty cart who seemed to be at the other end of her aisle, and she felt uncomfortable, so she went to another aisle, kept shopping. He ended up going to the other end of that aisle that she was in, and still no groceries. She's got stuff. Her husband was in a different part of the store, and so she decided to turn around, and she called out for him. She didn't go looking for him, she called out for her husband. And the husband kind of probably noticed the tone in her voice, and he actually went to see what was going on, and she kind of told him, and they immediately went to check out. Well, the man followed her to the checkout. He still didn't have any groceries in his cart, but he's pretending as if he's trying to, put things through the little laser thing and self checkout. You have to put your item on the on the screen, but he had no items, and so they checked out. They told the manager, but the manager really can't do anything because nothing had happened yet. But what if her husband hadn't been there? What if
Hmm.
somebody else was too busy to think about that woman in the store? Because whether it's trafficking, abduction is denying the rights of a human being. And yes, that is slavery if you're forcing someone to do something they don't want to do, whether it's labor, whether it's sex, or it's debt reduction, whatever they're using that person for against their will. So that's just one example. And especially, with holidays or super sports events, things like that, people aren't paying attention. So I've been telling people a lot in interviews this week, if you're a parent, a grandparent, any adult in charge of a child, don't tell them just, sure, go ahead and play in the toy department. I'll come back and get you when I'm done with getting my groceries. No, don't do that, please, because the predators know you're distracted. They know that those kids are easy prey if they get let loose from the guardian. And we have to be more diligent. But what to what BQ was saying is, even the kids that we rescued off the street, we rescued over 300 kids successfully off the streets in Central Oregon over a 14-year period of time. They were like me. They called our hotline in desperation on their second, third, or fourth suicide attempt because somebody told them, call this number, they'll help you. And they're like, it's my last thread of hope to reach out and pray that somebody will see me as valuable, as worthy of helping. I had one girl who eventually became our legal daughter, our daughter officially. The first thing she said is, well, you're probably not going to want me, but my psychologist told me to tell you this, that, and the other thing, suicidal ideation, and all these other things. And all I could think about was, I want that girl. I want to help her. I have to help her because I don't know that I know how to help her, but I know I'm going to meet with her and figure out how to get her housed, how to get her fed, how to help her get a job and get back to a stable life because that's how bad it is, Keith. A lot of people think, oh, teenagers are just rebellious, they're running away. And I'm sure there are a percentage, but it's very small. A lot of them nowadays are running from things like I wished I could have. In my own situation, they're running from things that are worse than the streets. So that was part of the impetus for writing A Fragile Thread of Hope with my writer, Kay Farish, because I wanted people to understand who these kids were. We took 4 examples and where they are now because not only did someone intercede, but somebody stayed the course for 3 to 5 months with them to make sure they could get on their feet and stay independent with minimal assistance, and also to create some kind of community for them that would feel like family because they had an absence of family. And they definitely did not have role modeling. In BQ's family, she had amazing parents. I love when she talks about her mom and her dad because they were just so wise for that era. But nowadays, we're lucky if the parents are home long enough to even check their kids' phones, to make dinner. Everybody's struggling economically. But our most important resource is right under our roofs, literally, our children, our teenagers, our college students. And now we have the voiceless population, the population that can't speak for themselves. They can't express their pain. And we wonder when the few survivors that do make it out of that evil are on drugs or they're messed up, that, how could, you just need to get cleaned up. Like it's that easy. And it's not. I mean, if somebody told you, well, Keith, just snap out of it, buddy, that probably would not have helped you when you were in the depths of despair. So
And
we are trying to educate.
you and I've also talked about some of these kids that do come from nice families, and I'll give you an example on this one, Keith. I'm not going to mention the name, but the wife of a very famous evangelist from Texas, and wonderful woman, went to the movies with her kids. One of the kids was probably around, I want to say, 7 years old, and had to use the restroom. So she let the little girl go to the restroom, and she went to the restroom by herself because she figured she was fine, smart enough to do it. She was there with the other kids, and that little girl didn't come back. And what happened was, she started to realize she's a very smart woman. Right away, she realized something was wrong. And she grabbed the kids. She, come on, we got to get your sister. And she's looking around for the little girl. And she was smart enough to just go ahead and yell, "My daughter's been taken." And they looked and they found the little girl. The predator had taken the little girl, put her in the bathroom, locked the door. He's going to hide her. And they were able to catch the guy on the way out, and thank God saved this little girl's life. But, to Andi's point about watch where your kids are going, even in the toy stores and things like this, you think, well, they're old enough, they'll know what to do. But sometimes they're really victimized. The other thing is that we talk about, make sure your kids have a code word. Yeah. Have a code word. When your kids are in trouble, and even if they go spend the night, my kids, we had a code word. They do it. My kids do it with their kids now. And so you call it, well, how is, and then you say, how is everything? And if they say, well, no, Uncle Fred will call you tomorrow. Well, we know that Uncle Fred has been dead for 35 years, is not going to call you tomorrow, so that they're in trouble. You see? There has to be a code word that only you and the family know and that you don't share with anybody else. And your kids have to be able to know that if they're saying help, that even if they're not as in much trouble as you would think they were, they get to have the ability to tell you, because you've got to be the one that says, I don't even care. It's okay. Just always know that you got to call me. Even if it's 3 a.m, I'll come and get you. Because that is the thing that helps. That bond has to go back kind of old school. And Andi's right. I grew up at a different time period. My parents, I couldn't cross the street without letting them know. I had to let them know everything where I was going. They had to know whether they had older brothers. What was the father like? What was the mother do? And I just thought, oh my gosh, give me a break, right? But they were right. And I did that with my kids too. And now we're finding we have to go back to old school. The problem is when you have a family member that's the predator, yes. How do those children survive? And that's what Andi has been so brilliant, is to try to figure out a way to help.
Well, let's talk about that, because we still need to take our audience on a journey on how to help. So let's start with the individual who's trying to escape a bad situation. Andi, you already said that you have a hotline, but that's only in one state, yes or no?
No, it's actually national. Our helplines and hotlines on voicesagainsttrafficking.com are national, US only. We don't have any for the other countries, but yes, so nationally they can call those hotlines, and what will happen, Keith, is that the person on the other end will identify the area that the person calling from is in with them, with their permission, and then find resources there locally to help them. But the great thing is, a lot of people, and I learned this decades later, some people knew there was something wrong with our family, but they didn't want to speak up. They didn't want to cause trouble. They didn't want to be embarrassed or cause any problems. And again, it was a different era. But I would rather that happen and have to apologize than to not, because you don't know if that kid, that young person, that boy, that girl, that young man, that young woman, is going to come back the same way that you see them. Just like BQ was saying, a couple of different examples. One, we had one gal that was actually taken across state lines because she wanted to go out with a young boy. Okay. Didn't want to tell mom. And he said, well, we'll just go out for a Coke at one of the big box stores that had food and stuff to offer. And so she met him there. And then suddenly he wasn't feeling well. But he said, don't worry, I'll get you home. I'm going to call one of my friends to take you home. And now she's like stuck between a rock and a hard place. My mom's going to be mad. She's going to kill me if she finds out. I need to get home. I have to go with his friend. Well, his friend brought two other friends. They took the girl. They were in Arizona from, I forgot what the town in California was, within an hour and a half. They had violated her, but they had not looked in her backpack. The mom had sewn a GPS device into the girl's backpack. And while it was barely functioning, it was enough for the mother to know that that girl was not where she needed to be. And she was able to call law enforcement. But that young girl at 13 did not go home the same way she left that day. So this is what we're trying to do is, okay, here's some real examples, everyone. We have books, we have magazines. We're going to have this amazing music compilation coming out. We're going to have a television show next year. We are using every medium that we can think of, as well as all of our members are offered to speak virtually at no cost. And so we are trying to reach humanity with every possible learning opportunity so that they can feel more proactive. And when you feel more proactive, you feel more hopeful.
And I had a thought, Andi. You just triggered a thought in me. Right now we're looking at young people that are being exposed, some people would say groomed, with a lot of sexually exploitive materials in the schools, things that they're forced to read to become more, shall we say, educated in the areas of sexual experience that many people didn't know about until when they got in their 20s and 30s. I had a thought as you were talking about this, Andi. Perhaps what parents can do and going to the school boards is trying to make sure that these young people have the information at hand regarding trafficking, helplines, to understand what is considered education and what is considered grooming. Because right now it's not politically correct to be able to even say anything about something that would be considered grooming to young people. But in a way, once their lives have been altered and exposed to things that are very harmful to them at an age where they're not really prepared for it and it's against their will. And I think that it would be great if there is folks out there that are going to school board meetings. We could encourage them to, at least in the libraries, be able to have the helplines, the phone numbers, the things to be able to have those young people know that if it doesn't feel right, if they feel that they're being abused or targeted, this is the number to call. And that's just a thought that came up while you were sharing your experience.
Right, just like the little notices on the bathroom stalls, that some organizations have put out. And those helplines and hotlines also have child abuse, suicide prevention, alcohol addiction hotline. We cover all of the major things that affect humanity because we do want to bring that hope, Dr. Keith, that you talked about, that there is someone who will listen, and they're neutral because they don't even know you, which makes it even safer sometimes to tell somebody your secrets, right? To tell somebody, I got so close a couple of times to being able to tell someone, and then one of the predators snuck up or came around, and I could never get it out, knowing that there would be worse consequences to pay. So when we talk about enslavement and human slavery, that binding, what you were talking about, BQ, any agenda that violates or takes away a child's right. Every human being breathing has the right to be able to grow up safely, to grow up valued, to grow up as a child. Let them explore, get their hands dirty, climb up a tree. If they fall out, they have ways to fix broken bones. I know, I've had a lot of them. But we have any agenda, political, religious, social, economic, whatever it is wrong when it does not allow a child to have their innocence, to grow up the way they need to grow up. It also is wrong for a parent who is raising and feeding and taking care of that child, maybe not perfectly. I don't know any perfect parent out there. I know great parents, but I don't know a perfect human being yet. And so we understand that part, but they also have rights to say, I really don't want my child at 5 to even hear the word sex, or to even hear terrifying things like human trafficking, but it's okay to terrify them with other things. So all we're trying to do, Keith, is kind of balance the scale a little bit. Why don't the schools have an anti-trafficking program? Why aren't we invited, even though we've asked to go into schools to speak? Why are we not allowing that information so that we can protect those children and the families connected to every victim? It affects the whole family system.
Well, can we talk? So let's talk about that. So there's going to be people watching, listening to this conversation. So let's talk about this at 2 levels. Those people who are interested in helping, what can they do? Let's start there.
Okay.
Is there things that they can do now that they've listened to you?
Well, they certainly can go to voicesagainsttrafficking.com.
Okay.
They can find and become join us. There are all different ways that they can become a part of our organization and become more active in it. There are groups that are belonging to our organization that they may want to particularly join or have an interest in. And they can also start kind of becoming active and finding out what's being done in the community. What's happening in your town? What's happening in your city? What's going on with your school? What's happening with the police department? What's happening with your member of Congress? One of the funny things that I learned moving from San Antonio, Texas to Washington, D.C., and I started doing a program with Radio America. And I had a few members of Congress on, and I realized, because I forget what the issue was, but it was very controversial. And I had a member of Congress call me up and say, because I'd said to the audience, if you're concerned about the vote on this, and I gave the member of Congress's phone number, and he called me directly and he said, BQ, get them off my back. Because when they get over 100 phone calls, are you kidding? He said, get them off my back. And I said, well, I'll help you get them off your back if you just vote right, if you listen to the people, if you understand the audience. One of the great comedians of all time I had the honor of getting to know back in the 1980s, and his name was George Burns. Some of your audience may know who he was.
I know who he is too.
Allen, and he played God. He was wonderful. And he said to me when I interviewed him, he said, kid, you're going to do all right. He said, but I'm going to give you one piece of advice. Don't forget the folks who buy the tickets. Meaning, me and Gracie got started during the vaudeville years, and people were broke and they'd have to try to figure out how to be able to afford to go see the show. So he'd say, don't forget the audience. Well, right now I'm telling you that even while we're talking, the people that are watching this, they're the 4th person at the table, because there's the 3 of us, but they're the 4th person that they can't talk to us right now. But we can encourage them to become a voice against trafficking, and to find out, what is that member of Congress doing? What is the position of the mayor? Remember, even as big a deal as they would like to have you think that they are, they still work for you. They work for you. They come to you. And remember, congressmen, they're great. They're better than senators, because almost every weekend they go home. They've got their offices in the DC area, but they have an office in their district. So if you can't reach them in Washington, DC, those big, powerful people, you call them in the district and you say, look, I'm a constituent. I vote. And I just noticed I've been following, and I'm doing such a good job on fighting human trafficking. And they'll say, well, I mean, he's blah, blah, blah. Just let them know you're there, because they do listen to you. Mayors, city council people,
Yep.
the police department, the fire department, they all are paid by the public. And guess who the audience is that we don't want to forget? They're the public.
So earlier, well, Andi, earlier, I think it was Andi that said it, or both of you had said it in one way or form of another. One voice isn't enough, but together we can make change, something like
Yeah.
that. How do we bring people together? Because if I wanted to do something, I'm just one person in a big town. I feel that my voice is going to get squashed. How do I get people to join in the vision, to join in the mission, to actually do something about this in my area? And I'm
Well,
here in
Let's go
Virginia.
back. Let's go
If-
back to the original example of when this country was founded. There was a handful of people that believed in religious freedom, right? And I'm sure that the more they talked about it, and they were at great risk. We're always at great risk when we stand against the norm or against the tide. But the hope, as the hope was way back then, a couple hundred years ago, is that if you, Keith, stand up, you know somebody who probably is very much like aligned with your beliefs or your desires, they'll probably go with you.
His
Yeah.
audience. And the other thing is, Andi, you start paying attention who's on the air.
Yes.
On local radio and television, especially in local radio, your morning drive talent and the evening tribe, that's the time that the audience listens most to radio and TV. You have pop music, you have beautiful music, you have regular news, you have country music, but they all have these formats where you can call in and talk on the air and find out who they are. And also find organizations that are like-minded, as Andi said, and go and check them out, talk to them. And then also you can say, well, I'd like to have you and your organization on my radio program, my TV program, on my podcast. I want the public to know that you're there. You start building networks. Most people think it's a complicated thing to build a network, but frankly, you got a network every day of your life. When you finally do go out to the grocery store, I'm sure you probably have a friend that's checking out, or you have the friend with the butcher, or you have a friend, somebody that'll give you a better cut of meat or tell you where the fresh produce is. Well, that's building a network. But in that network, you can expand it. Say, Ralph, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that, Betty? You start building your network. And do those people, you're going to let them know. Listen to my podcast. We're going to be talking about human trafficking in this city.
Yep.
That's how you start, and find out with your religious leaders. Where do they stand on it? Where does the constituency stand on it? You have to start in a way, it's funny, you kind of have to, you have to build it up. Nothing has been created by destroying. The only way you can create something is by building it up. And it starts as simple as a grocery store, the mailman, the gas station. Build your network. Churches, organizations that are concerned about school children, find out what their position is, and that's how you build it. And you build it little by little, and before you know it, you got a pretty powerful network.
And like BQ said, you hold people accountable. If that mayor, that school board member can't even tell you what they've done to protect your community, or what they've done to educate the community about predators and online internet safety, or what grooming really is, if they haven't done that before they run for office or a position, or they haven't done it after, then they need to not get your support, not get your money, not get your time. And like BQ said, you need to use your voice. So that's what we're trying to do, is rally voices together.
At their meetings. If they're meeting, having a town hall session, and they have a time when you want to ask a question, we say, anybody here in the audience want to ask a question? Don't be unkind. We always ask people to be respectful, because you build more communities with respect and kindness. But don't be afraid to ask the hard question and say, Congressman, I see you're going all around your district, but I don't hear you really talking about human rights. And I don't hear you talking about your fight against trafficking. Are you going to be holding a town hall on that? Are you going to have any sessions on that? What's your position? Have you passed any legislation? Put them on the spot.
Absolutely. Even up to the candidates that are running for a big office right now. I don't even think I've heard one person really talk about human trafficking, but we don't want people to despair either. I mean, look at the life that I just explained to you. If God can overcome the evil in one victim's life, when I heard that voice and I thought somebody actually saw me, somebody knows I exist, when that happened, that changed everything. That voice is still guiding this movement for human rights because there are a lot of ways our rights are violated. However, the most critical one, and human trafficking did not start in America, in case somebody listening thinks that's true. It started Greco-Roman era, probably shortly after Cain and Abel, because there has always been a trade of human life for money, for sex, or something of value to someone who is willing to enforce it, like BQ said earlier, the bullies. But you know what bullies are afraid of? Strength, confidence, empowerment. So our goal, our hope is to up that ante, up that level of confidence and empowerment in the everyday person to say, you know what, I saw something that didn't look right. I'm going to make a call, or I'm going to go to the local law enforcement and find out what I should report, because I'd rather report it in case it's true. And here's a perfect example. A couple months ago, we brought one of our partners, one of our members out. His name is Brian Searcy. He has an amazing program called Be Aware, Stay Safe. And in 4 minutes a day, any family, regardless of what it looks like, single parent, two parents, grandparents, foster parents, doesn't matter. They can learn in 21 days the habits of being more aware, not just about trafficking issues, but crime in general, and how to better protect themselves, their families, how to really recognize signs of danger that we would normally not look at so much. And then in 90 days, it's a lifestyle. So can you imagine 4 minutes a day for 90 days to have a lifestyle that will forever protect generations in your bloodline? And what happened was, when he came out in Bend, Oregon, we have a wonderful shelter, and they have an offshoot, what they call a low barrier shelter. Anyone can walk in, no questions asked. There's coffee, there's a cot, whatever. So this young girl walked in, and one of the program directors thought there was something more to her situation, but couldn't quite identify it. We got Brian on the phone with him before he even landed in Bend. And because of that conversation, when we showed up to do the presentation, that girl was already in a separate room with law enforcement, taking her story, interviewing, as we say. And she told them that she knew where there were other girls that were hidden. So when they went and ran her name, she was actually on the missing children's list. Somebody was looking for her. They just hadn't found her yet. So she had been abducted. Somehow she got loose, got away. But I don't know what happened with the other girls. But what I do know is, because someone became aware, they were empowered to act, to assess, and to identify there's a situation. And they did the proper thing when they called law enforcement. They felt confident, right? That's the hope, is that people will act if they feel like they're prepared, if they feel like they have some tools, which is what Voices Against Trafficking is really good at providing and getting out there. Now we're going to do it in a global way next week. But the hope, as we've talked about, Keith, is that if somebody takes one piece of information today that they didn't have yesterday, they're going to be more prepared. And prevention is what will help reduce human trafficking, reduce sexual assaults, reduce all these things that don't have to happen. So that's what our hope is that people will know. And if the people have been wounded, the walking wounded out there, regardless of what age or stage you're at, I'm well into, the second half of my life. Notice how we didn't give an exact number, but
don't go there. Don't go there.
Yeah, I know. But I have the best life ever, even though there's great personal cost and sacrifice. Same with BQ to what we do. I still deal with PTSD. I still have moments. I still have issues physically. But you know what? I get up and show up, which is what we taught the kids that we rescued. So if you're out there, you're not alone. It was not your fault that happened. There's nothing you could do to ever earn or deserve somebody taking your rights away, somebody violating you. That just isn't possible. Okay.
But what Andi has done She's taken all that suffering and pain, and believe me, she went through a lot. Like a lot of people would never ever want anyone that they love, even anybody that they don't even like, to suffer. She went through it. But she's been courageous enough to not let it kill her. And in fact, to be able to take the scars and the pain and to be able to recognize it and provide that hope to someone that feels completely isolated, desperate, freaked out, and without any feeling that there's any way they can go but to hurt themselves. And she saved a lot of people. I mean, she's quite a brave woman. That's why I really respect her so much. And on the cover of our magazine, I think I've shown this magazine here. This is the Voices of Courage magazine. I hope you can see it.
We can
We
see.
have a wonderful woman with Crystal Chen, and we put her on because Crystal Chen stood up for her religion, and she was tortured brutally by the Chinese communists. And in her brain, I was talking to her. I never heard anything so horrible. And she said that, and she'd seen her mother die and her relatives die, but she willed herself, if I get through this, I'm going to have the courage to talk about it. I'm going to go forward. Well, think about it. It's like she's very much like Andi, different type of situation, but in that their will and their desire to not let that kill them, but to utilize it for good, to save others, is really something so fundamental that we look at, even those of us who are Christian, of what Christ did. He took the pain and the suffering to alleviate our sins and to help us. For us, people like Andi have been able to provide a way for those who have absolutely had every door shut, living in a thing where they feel mortified and really abused and awful. She says, you don't have to stop and end your life there. There's a window of opportunity, and I'm going to show you how to get through that window, and then the world begins. And hope is the best of
Of all
all.
things. So let's leave the conversation there. That was perfect. Andi, BQ, thank you for this inspiring and tear-jerking conversation. One of the most empowering conversations I've ever had. And so I thank you for what you're doing. Stay around a bit longer because you've got a lot more work to do, both of you, because we're moving into 2024 and
Yeah.
beyond. And so make sure that we save as many people as possible. Of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally, and this has been another edition of the Envision Speakers Series. I'll see you next time. Take care.